Ever wonder if it's truly possible to change who you are after 50? Not just your address or your job, but the very bedrock of your personality. I used to think the answer was no. I thought we were all, more or less, finished products by the time the half-century mark rolled around. We were who we were, the concrete had set. Then, I watched my wife, Karen, prove me completely and gloriously wrong on a winding mountain road in the heart of the Italian Dolomites. We had sold the house, the cars, the lifetime of accumulated stuff. We'd traded a 3-bedroom suburban box for 70 square feet on wheels, a sturdy, if sometimes temperamental, camper van we'd christened Matilda. For me, this was the culmination of a lifelong dream. For Karen, it was, well, it was an act of faith. An act of faith in me, in us, but one that was tested daily by the sheer, unpredictable reality of it all. That morning, we woke up cocooned in the cool, pine-scented air of a small campground near Cortina d'Ampezzo. Sunlight, sharp and golden, was just beginning to slice across the jagged peaks that surrounded us like stone titans. It was breathtakingly beautiful, the kind of beauty that makes you feel small and infinite all at once. I was already outside, leaning against Matilda with a steaming mug of coffee, mapping out our route. "Morning, love," I said as the side door slid open with a familiar rumble. Karen emerged, blinking in the bright morning light. She was still in her pajamas, a soft blue set that looked oddly domestic against the wild backdrop of the mountains. "Morning," she replied, her voice a little tight. She wasn't looking at the mountains. She was looking at the map spread across the hood of the van. "Look at this view," I prompted gently, gesturing with my mug. "Isn't it incredible?" "It is," she agreed, but her eyes were still glued to the thin, squiggly red line on the paper. Is that the only way to get to Murano?" I knew which line she was staring at. The Great Dolomite Road. It wasn't just a road, it was a legend. A serpentine ribbon of asphalt draped over 3 of the highest, most dramatic mountain passes in the Alps, Passo Pordoi, Passo Sella, and Passo Gardena. It was a driver's dream and, for anyone with a hint of vertigo or a fear of heights, a potential nightmare. "It's the most scenic way," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "It's the whole reason we came to this region. They say it's one of the most beautiful drives in the world. They also say it has dozens of hairpin turns and sheer drops with no guardrails," she countered, her finger tracing the impossibly tight switchbacks on the map. I saw her shoulders tense. This was the familiar dance of our new life, my boundless enthusiasm meeting her cautious, deeply ingrained practicality. For 30 years, she had been the planner, the risk assessor, the one who made sure our lives ran on a foundation of security and predictability. And I had just dynamited that foundation. She had been so brave. She'd packed up our life, said goodbye to friends and a garden she'd nurtured for 2 decades, and she'd done it with a smile. But I saw the doubt that flickered in her eyes in quiet moments. I heard it in her voice when she asked about insurance, or warranties, or where the next reliable water source was. It was the ghost of her old life, a life where every variable was controlled, haunting our new world of beautiful, chaotic freedom. "We don't have to do it," I offered, and I meant it. Her happiness was the entire point. "There's a longer route, through the valleys. It'll add a day, but it's much flatter." She looked from the map to the colossal, sun-drenched peaks, then back at me. I could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. A part of her desperately wanted the safety of the valley road. But another, smaller part, a part that had been stirring to life since we'd started this journey, was curious. It was the part of her that had agreed to this crazy adventure in the first place. "No," she said finally, taking a deep breath that seemed to inflate her with a fragile resolve. "No, you're right. This is why we're here," she managed a small smile. "Just, drive slowly. And please, stay away from the edge." "I will always stay away from the edge," I promised, pulling her into a one-armed hug. "It's going to be amazing. You'll see." I believed it. I just wasn't sure she did. As we packed up and prepared Matilda for the climb, I felt a knot of my own anxiety. It wasn't about the drive, it was about her. I wanted this life to be a source of joy for her, not a daily trial of her courage. I desperately hoped today wouldn't be the day that proved her doubts right. We started our ascent out of the valley, and for the first few miles, everything was fine. The road was wide enough, winding through lush green meadows dotted with wooden chalets and the cheerful clang of cowbells. Karen even seemed to relax a little, pointing out a field of wildflowers that cascaded down a hillside in a riot of purple and yellow. "It really is beautiful up here," she said, her voice losing some of its earlier tension. She had her camera out, snapping pictures through the windshield. "See? Told you," I grinned, feeling a wave of relief. Maybe this would be easier than I thought. But the Dolomites don't give up their secrets that easily. As we climbed higher, the landscape began to change. The gentle meadows gave way to stark, gray rock. The trees thinned out, clinging stubbornly to the mountainside. And the road began to shrink. It coiled back on itself in a series of ever tighter hairpin turns, known locally as tornanti. With each turn, Matilda felt bigger and more cumbersome. I had to swing wide, check my mirrors, and crawl around the bend at a snail's pace. On our right was the solid rock face of the mountain. On our left, there was nothing. Just a dizzying drop to the valley floor, thousands of feet below. Sometimes there was a low stone wall for comfort, and sometimes there was nothing but a few feet of gravel between our tires and oblivion. I glanced over at Karen. She had put her camera away. Her hands were gripping the dashboard, her knuckles white. She was staring straight ahead, her breathing shallow. She wasn't seeing the majestic, awe-inspiring beauty anymore. She was only seeing the edge. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and even. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was a thin whisper. A lie. We both knew it. Then, it happened. As I was navigating a particularly sharp, uphill bend, a group of cyclists shot past us on the inside, their colorful jerseys a blur of motion. The tight space forced me to hug the outside edge a little more closely than I wanted to. Just as our front right tire rolled over a rough patch of asphalt, there was a loud, metallic clunk from somewhere underneath us, followed by a scraping sound that seemed to echo in the vast, silent space. My heart jumped into my throat. Karen let out a small gasp. "What was that?" "I don't know," I said, my own calm facade starting to crack. My mind raced through a horrifying catalogue of possibilities. Axle. Suspension. Transmission. A breakdown here, on a narrow switchback with no shoulder, was the stuff of nightmares. The scraping continued, a rhythmic, grating sound that synchronized with the rotation of the wheels. It was loud enough to turn heads. A car descending the pass slowed down, its driver giving us a concerned look. "John, we have to stop," Karen said, her voice trembling. "We have to stop right now." She was right. Pushing on could turn a small problem into a catastrophic one. My eyes scanned the road ahead. There was nowhere. Just more narrow road and more sheer drop. My palms were sweating on the steering wheel. This was it. This was Karen's worst fear realized, stranded, helpless, on the edge of a cliff in a foreign country. All because of my dream. A wave of guilt washed over me. Finally, about 200 yards ahead, I saw a sliver of hope, a small scenic turnout, barely bigger than the van itself, carved into the mountainside. "Hold on," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "I see a spot up there." The next 200 yards felt like 10 miles. The scraping sound seemed to be getting louder, a death rattle for our adventure. I felt Karen's fear radiating from the passenger seat like heat. It was a tangible thing, filling the small cab of the van. I pulled Matilda into the turnout, the front tires bumping against the low stone wall at the edge. I put the van in park and engaged the handbrake with a forceful tug. For a long moment, The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and Karen's shaky breaths. "Okay," I said, trying to project a confidence I absolutely did not feel. "Let's not panic. I'll get out and take a look." This was the moment. The moment where, in our old life, Karen would have stayed in the car, wringing her hands, her mind consumed by a vortex of worst-case scenarios while I played the role of the capable husband, the problem solver. She would have become a spectator to her own anxiety. But this wasn't our old life. I opened my door and slid out into the thin mountain air. The scale of the place was overwhelming. We were a tiny, insignificant speck on this colossal wall of rock. The silence was immense, broken only by the distant whisper of the wind. I was about to crouch down to look under the van when I heard the passenger door slide open. I turned, surprised. Karen was getting out. She didn't have her jacket on, and she hugged her arms against the chill, but her face was set with a new kind of determination. It wasn't resolve, it was something harder. It was the look of someone who had decided that being terrified in the passenger seat was no longer an option. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice still shaky, but there. Active. I was so taken aback I almost didn't know how to respond. The flashlight. It's in the drawer under the bench." She nodded and disappeared back into the van, emerging a moment later with our heavy-duty mag light. She didn't just hand it to me. She walked to the front of the van, her back to the dizzying view, and crouched down beside me. "Where did the sound come from?" she asked, her focus entirely on the undercarriage of the van. "The front right, I think," I said, my own nerves starting to calm a little. Her presence beside me was an unexpected anchor. We were in this together, not just physically in the same spot, but mentally. I lay on the cold gravel, wiggling my way under the engine block. The air smelled of hot metal and dust. "Okay, shine the light over here," I called out. A bright, steady beam cut through the darkness. She held it without a tremor. We scanned the suspension, the axle, the brake assembly. Everything looked solid. No telltale drips of fluid, no broken parts dangling precariously. "I don't see anything," I said, a mix of relief and confusion in my voice. "Everything looks fine." The sound was definitely coming from here, though, she insisted. It was a scrape, like metal on pavement. She moved the beam of light slowly, methodically, across every component. She was no mechanic, but she had a keen eye for things that were out of place. It was the same attention to detail that made her garden so perfect, the same eye that could spot a single weed from 20 paces. "Wait," she said suddenly. "What's that?" "Right there, behind the wheel." I followed her light. Tucked away behind the front right tire was a piece of metal I didn't recognize. It was a heat shield, a thin piece of aluminum designed to protect the chassis from the exhaust. One of the bolts holding it in place had vibrated loose on the rough road. The shield had bent downwards, just enough to scrape against the pavement on sharp turns. It wasn't a structural failure. It wasn't the transmission. It was a loose heat shield. I wiggled back out, covered in dust but grinning. "You found it," I said, looking at her with a new kind of admiration. "It's just a heat shield." The bolt came loose. Relief washed over her face, so potent it was almost visible. But it was followed by something else. Pride. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. "So, can we fix it?" "We can do better than fix it," I said, grabbing my small toolkit from its compartment. "We can secure it properly." For the next 10 minutes, we worked as a team. She held the light, her hand now as steady as a surgeon's. I found a wrench that fit the remaining bolt and tightened it. For the broken side, we improvised. We used a couple of heavy-duty zip ties from my kit, threading them through the holes and pulling them tight. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it was solid. It would hold until we could get a proper new bolt in Murano. When we finished, I pushed the bent shield back into place. It was secure. Silent. I stood up, wiping my greasy hands on a rag. Karen stood up too, a smudge of dust on her cheek. She looked at our handiwork, then at me. "Team Matilda," she said, and for the first time that day, her smile reached her eyes. It was a genuine, radiant smile. We got back in the van. I started the engine and pulled slowly out of the turnout, making a sharp turn. Silence. The scraping sound was gone. I looked over at Karen. She wasn't gripping the dashboard anymore. She was looking out the window, but this time, she was really seeing it. "You know," she said thoughtfully, as we started the next series of switchbacks, "from up here, you can see how all the roads connect. It doesn't look so scary from a distance." She was no longer just my passenger. She was my co-pilot. For the rest of the drive up to the summit of Paso Pordoy, she was an active participant. She called out cyclists with a calm, clear voice. She spotted a turnout with a particularly stunning view that I would have missed. She pointed out a marmot sunning itself on a rock. The fear that had held her captive had been replaced by a focused, vibrant engagement with the world around her. She was navigating, not just enduring. When we finally rolled into the car park at the summit, 2,239 meters above sea level, the feeling was electric. The air was thin and crisp, and the panoramic view was utterly staggering. Jagged limestone peaks, known as the Pale Mountains, surrounded us in every direction, their pale faces glowing in the afternoon sun. It felt like we were on the roof of the world. I turned off the engine, and the silence that rushed in was profound. I looked at Karen, ready to say something like, "We made it," but she was already opening her door. She stepped out of the van and walked to the edge of the viewpoint. She stood there for a long moment, her hands on her hips, taking it all in. She turned her face up to the sun, closing her eyes. And then, she did something that I will never forget for as long as I live. She threw her arms wide, as if to embrace the entire mountain range, and let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy. It wasn't loud or obnoxious. It was a sound of release, of triumph, that echoed slightly in the vast, open space. I just sat in the driver's seat, watching her. My own eyes started to burn with tears. This was the peak experience, but it had nothing to do with the altitude or the view. It was seeing her, my brilliant, cautious, wonderful wife, standing on top of a mountain she was terrified to climb, looking completely and utterly free. The drive hadn't broken her, it had remade her. After a while, she walked back to the van, her face flushed with the cold air and exhilaration. "Okay," she said, beaming at me. "I get it now. I really, truly get it." That evening, we found a perfect spot to camp, a small, quiet air-de-service just over the pass, nestled in a valley that glowed with the soft light of the setting sun. The dramatic peaks we had just conquered now served as our magnificent backdrop. The air grew cold quickly as the sun dipped below the horizon, so we decided to cook inside. The atmosphere in the van was completely transformed. Usually, after a long or stressful drive, there's a quiet tension as we go through the motions of setting up for the night. But tonight, the little space was filled with a light, buoyant energy. Karen was humming as she chopped vegetables for a simple pasta dish, moving around the compact kitchen with an easy, confident grace. "Can you believe that view from the top?" she asked, not for the first time. "My camera couldn't even capture it. It's just too big for a lens." It was something else, I agreed, setting up our small folding table. "But I think my favorite view was watching you when we got there." She stopped chopping and looked at me, a soft smile on her face. I felt a little silly, shouting like that. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice thick with emotion. That was the best sound I've heard on this whole trip. We ate our dinner in a comfortable silence, the clinking of our forks the only sound. The experience of the day hung in the air between us, a shared victory that felt more profound than just a successful drive. It was a turning point, and we both knew it. Later, with mugs of hot tea warming our hands, she finally put words to the change I had witnessed. You know, she began, her gaze distant, fixed on the darkening silhouette of the mountains outside our window. For months, even after we'd made the decision, I was secretly terrified. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. This was important. I thought this whole van life thing was your dream, she continued, turning to look at me directly. And I was going along with it because I love you, and I didn't want to be the person who held you back from living your dream. I was so afraid of being the anchor. Her honesty was a punch to the gut. I had known she was hesitant, but I hadn't understood the depth of her sacrifice, the fear that she was merely an accessory to my adventure. Karen, no, I started, but she held up a hand. Let me finish. I kept thinking about everything we gave up. The security, the community, knowing where your next doctor's appointment was. I saw this life as a series of risks and problems to be managed. Every strange engine noise, every closed road, every confusing sign was just more proof that we'd made a huge mistake, that we were too old for this. She took a sip of her tea, gathering her thoughts. When we heard that noise on the road today, a part of me thought, this is it. This is the disaster I've been waiting for. Now we'll have to turn back, and John will see how foolish this all was. She looked down at her mug. But then, something shifted. When you got out of the van, I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't be the frightened passenger in my own life. I had to get out. I had to do something, even if it was just holding a flashlight. She looked up again, her eyes shining. And when we found the problem, when we fixed it together, with a wrench and a couple of zip ties, I realized something. The security I thought we'd left behind. It wasn't in the house or the steady paycheck. It was never in those things. The security is in us. It's in our ability to face the unknown together and figure it out. It's right here, in this van. I reached across the small table and took her hand. It was warm and steady in mine. Today, she said, her voice filled with a quiet power, standing on top of that mountain, I didn't feel like I was just going along with your dream. For the first time, I felt like it was my dream, too. I earned that view. We earned it. And it was so much sweeter than just having it handed to you. This, right here, was the entire reason we had done this. It wasn't about the places, the photos, or the freedom from a 9-to-5. It was about this. It was about rediscovering who we were, individually and together, when all the comfortable scaffolding of our old life was stripped away. It was about learning, at 55 and 57, that we were stronger, more resilient, and more capable of joy than we had ever imagined. I love you, I said, my voice hoarse. I am so incredibly proud of you. I'm proud of me, too, she said, and there was no ego in it, only a simple, beautiful statement of fact. I always thought adventure was for other people, for younger people. I thought my role was to be sensible. But maybe the most sensible thing a person can do is choose to feel alive. We sat like that for a long time, holding hands across the table as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to prick the deep, dark velvet of the night. The ghosts of doubt had been vanquished, not by argument or persuasion, but by the simple, powerful act of facing a fear and finding your own strength on the other side. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee already brewing. I sat up and saw Karen sitting at the table, the map spread out before her. She was tracing a new route with her finger, a look of focused excitement on her face. This was a scene I had never witnessed before. I was always the navigator, the planner of the next leg. She looked up and saw me watching. A wide, bright grin spread across her face. "Morning, sleepyhead," she chirped. I was just looking. There's this little side road off the main route to Murano. The guidebook says it leads to a lake, Lago di Carezza. They call it the Rainbow Lake, because of its colors. It looks a little squiggly. She used the same word she had used yesterday to describe her fear, but today it was filled with playful anticipation. She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with a challenge. "What do you think?" Too much adventure for one weekend. I laughed, a deep, happy sound that filled the small van. My wife, the woman who yesterday was terrified of a hairpin turn, was now actively seeking out more squiggly lines on the map. The transformation was complete. The concrete hadn't set after all. It turned out it was more like clay, ready to be reshaped by new experiences, new challenges, and new joys. I think, I said, swinging my legs out of bed and reaching for my coffee cup, that it sounds like a perfect plan. As we drove away from our mountain campsite, with Karen in the passenger seat acting as a true co-pilot, navigating us towards our next discovery, I felt a profound sense of peace. This journey wasn't just about seeing the world. It was about seeing each other, and ourselves, in a new light. Thanks for joining us for this part of our journey. It was a big one for us, and it's a reminder that sometimes the biggest obstacles are the ones we build in our own minds. We hope it gives you a little inspiration to face one of your own squiggly roads, whatever it may be. Until next time, keep living fully, 1 mile and one unforgettable story at a time.